All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our October training. Many of you may know that October is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. And so Alive at Last always takes the opportunity to focus on that particular topic in our training. And so we're very excited to have with us Karen DeArmond today. And if you're new to Alive at Last, we're just grateful to have you. Alive at Last exists to support and provide aftercare for women who have experienced any type of sexual exploitation. So, sexual exploitation does occur in marriage and it does occur in families. And so, for that reason, domestic abuse is within that category of sexual abuse. So, we minister to women who have experienced trafficking or they've been in the sex industry. Oftentimes, women come to us having been involved in online prostitution, um, maybe working in the sex industry in some way, strip clubs and other areas of sex industry. So we exist to come alongside those women and provide healing, provide hope, and
Mm.
help them rebuild their lives. We do that through mentorship, and also we have an outreach where we go into safe houses and shelters and provide faith-based small groups. And specifically, we have a trauma care small group, which
Mm.
is a great segue. As I introduce Karen, she actually serves as one of our small group leaders in the Fort Worth area. She has been serving with us for, I believe, three different rounds of small groups now. So we're so grateful for her. Karen, we're thankful for the
Mm.
experience that you bring to the table, having served women in for a number of years who have experienced abuse in all types in family settings in the commercial industry um, as well. And so we're just really grateful to have you today. We're thankful for the story that you bring. You know, oftentimes, Karen, you know women because you serve each week, but they're just wanting to get to a healthy place. They certainly don't want to share their story.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful for women like you that have a level of healing to the place where they're ready to use their story in order to benefit others, to benefit the kingdom of God and help um, snatch women from a hopeless situation. You
Mhm.
know, it's not just about being free from that as you're
Mhm.
in a shelter and those women are in a safe setting where they don't have to think about the bills right now.
Mhm.
They don't have to think about how to manage just surviving day in day out. So they're in a safe place, and it's a perfect time for them to address themselves and find inner healing.
Mhm.
And so, what a wonderful thing! But you know that they're not always willing. It's a big deal to come to the place where you're willing to actually share some of your story. So, Karen, first of all, we just welcome you, and we just want to give you the opportunity to freely share with us
Mhm.
today. I have some uh, points that we would just want to discuss, and we just encourage you guys that are online. If you have questions, there should be time at the end for question and answer. Also, you'll want to take note of the chat. Um, so we will be posting the link in our chat for Karen's book. If you know anyone that is in uh, an unsafe situation with their partner and might want to hear someone else's story of how they got out of that situation, Karen's book, I've read it. It's one of those that you can't put down. So I recommend it highly, and we'll have that link for you in the chat. So without any further ado, Karen, welcome. We'd love just to have you just
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about yourself. And then
Mhm.
also, if you would lead into your story as we begin
Mhm.
to discuss the practicality of where you came from, how you actually arrived at a healthy place.
Mhm. Well, I'm so excited to be here, and I never thought I would ever say that I would be happy to talk about domestic abuse, because when you're in it, all you want to do is hide it. You don't want anybody to know that it's happening, and so what I do now, what I love to do, is to walk with women in the aftermath of domestic abuse. There's so many things that they go through that they don't understand. They don't understand their anger, the rage. And most people will tell them, well, you just need to forgive so you don't go into bitterness. And it's like, no, I think you need to be angry. And I also think you might need to be a bitter for a while. It's not a lifelong place, but it's helping them to normalize what they're experiencing and not to hide it, not to stuff it, not to bury it, because they do feel hopeless, and they're finally feeling so many emotions they couldn't feel in their marriage. So it is such an honor for me to be able to walk with women through that process, on an individual basis and through groups. So I do groups with Alive at Last at Salvation Army. I'm also working with a therapist out of Colorado, and leading small groups for her, so just to give women a place, because they do feel isolated, a place where they can connect with other women. And that's the beauty of small groups, is you find out you're not alone, and other people, though their experience may be different, they're experiencing the same trauma and the same pain. And so with that, like, I have been out, I'm coming up on the 20th anniversary, the day after Christmas, of when I left my abusive marriage. And I stayed for way too long, 30 years, 4 months, and 2 days. And I don't know how many minutes, because I never calculated that. And it, and I, often people want to say, well, why would you stay so long? It's because I didn't know I could leave, um, and didn't know how to leave, and didn't have support to leave, and didn't have the resources. I was far away from my family. I was far, far away from them. And and he was also law enforcement. So, and there were no shelters where we lived. So there were a lot of things that kept me in the marriage. And it actually is like the worst question you can ask a woman is, why did you stay? Better questions are, why would a man abuse his wife? Why would he do that? Why do we make this okay for men, that we talk to women that maybe they should do better, but we never talk to the men? And and so that's one of the the questions that I really, really dislike, but yet I do like the question, because then I can maybe change our thinking about what we think about women and domestic abuse. um, and through that 30 years of marriage, we had two kids, and I experienced every type of abuse. Like, there's Mending the Soul has a wheel that's probably the most detailed wheel for abuse, and I could literally check mark every single one of them. And and so that, that takes a long time to heal from. And so, though I left in 2004, it really took me until 2013 before I started healing, because when I came out, I was feeling all those emotions, all the anger, all the frustration, everything to go with it, but nobody knew what to do with that. And and because of that, I realized nobody wanted to hear my story. Nobody cared. They thought I was weak, that there was something wrong with me, that I would stay in a marriage that long, or that I was in it at all. And people just literally pushed me away, and my family did the basics. Oh, well, you just need to forgive him. So I thought that's what I was supposed to do. So I forgave him. Well, I didn't. I realized much, much later that I didn't, but I was slapping on those Christian band-aids. Well, just forgive him. Oh, you just need to let it go. It's in the past. But people say let it go, but no one tells you how to let it go. And so there is no letting go. Those memories are always there. We don't ever forget of them or forget them. Only God forgets. We cannot forget. We have to live with the memories of what we've gone through. And so I discovered that it's better to bury the emotions and not even deal with them than it was to live in this emotional roller coaster that just felt like I was dying. And so I stuffed everything, and I put on this pretty little facade, and act like I was a know-it-all, very self-righteous and pretty judgmental, mostly of myself. But I had this little facade to keep everybody out. And then 7 years later in 2013, that's when God brought me to Mending the Soul. And he started the process of peeling back the layers. Um, but I still didn't feel anything really. I got married in 2010, remarried 5 years after I left. I still don't know how I got married when I didn't feel a lot. Um, but I did. And and so it was 3 years after we were married that I started that healing journey. And most of my healing has actually happened since 2019, because that's when I started feeling all my emotions came out and when I started grieving everything that happened. And I spent my grieving for like 8 or 9 months. And that really propelled me into an even deeper healing that I'd had up to that point. And
I have a question
mhm,
regarding, you said it took a while for you to address your own healing.
mhm,
Um, First of all, it sounds like there were not the resources. I think there are more today,
mhm,
and this whole topic of sexual abuse in marriage, domestic abuse, it's
mhm,
coming to
mhm,
light a bit more. People are talking about it, but it's
mhm.
happening within the church circles, we know statistically.
Yes.
So that
Mhm,
may be one of the reasons the resources are not out there. People are
mhm,
embarrassed,
mhm.
ashamed. But could you share how did you find the resources such as Mending the Soul? Was it within the church sector?
I did find Bending the Soul in the church sector. They were something they were launching. And so I went through it and I thought by the end I was healed. And I wasn't. It was just the beginning. It was a launch pad. But there, when I came out, there were no resources. I did buy all the books that told me what I went through and discovered there were names for what I experienced, but they didn't talk about healing. And in the church environments I was in, nobody talked about healing. And I didn't know it was possible because I grew up in, I don't want to say I grew up, I didn't start going to church till I was 15, but in that environment of all the churches I went through, the feeling was that, oh, you know Jesus, life sucks, then you die and everything's better. And so we're just supposed to endure and suffer through until we get to heaven. And that is not what scripture says. Why there's so many scriptures if God wants to heal the brokenhearted, and he didn't say that it's for after you die.
No.
And we have, and so we've never made it available. And honestly, social media, some people hate it, but social media has been a godsend for women in domestic abuse, because there's this platform, there are these advocates. We've started having there's trainings to become an advocate, which I've done. I'm in the finalization of a second advocacy training for trauma. All of these resources are available that were never there because we didn't talk about it, especially in church. The last place domestic abuse should be is in Christianity. The last place patriarchy should be is in Christianity. People say, well, but it's in the Bible. But just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean we should do it.
Right, right. And I believe God has grace for social elements. He just
Yeah.
wants to get involved in people's lives as much as he can, but we often shut him out with such things,
Yeah.
the patriarchal.
Mm.
And so, would you speak to that, like how that's affecting our church culture, which again that affects us in culture overall. You know,
Yes. It,
so would you
yes.
that whole term of patriarchal authority?
Yes, it's the it part of it, there's beliefs, there's some people that don't believe in patriarchy, that men and women are partners, and some people that believe that the man is a leader actually don't live that way, that men should make the final decision. Well, that's a lot to put on a man. He shouldn't have to make decisions alone. It should be something that we do together, not something where one person makes all the final decisions. It really needs to be a partnership of doing that together as a couple. And so, but what patriarchy does, which we see it in so many different cultures and religions, That it's in Christianity seems strange because Jesus actually came and busted that patriarchal view. Um, but when you get that power over, if you've seen the umbrella, here's the umbrella, and then the man's under the umbrella, and here's a wife, and here's the children. Well, the last I looked, there were no umbrellas in Christianity. And Paul said there's neither male nor female. We are all under Christ. I don't need my husband to leave me through to be a leader for me in my spiritual life. I don't, we do that together. He totally different in how he does his quiet time versus how I do it. We do it completely different, and neither one is wrong. And I've actually been a Christian way longer than he has. And so if we go by that, technically I would need to be the leader because I've been a believer for way longer. But that's not how we do our marriage. But what it sets up is that if men are above women and women are always have to be submissive and do whatever they say, we are literally setting up for failure. We're setting up the dynamic for domestic abuse, that men's roles and women's roles, when in reality, we're all one under Christ. That when we're all one, and but there's this general belief in some parts of Christianity that believe that women, because Eve was the one who was deceived, they were both deceived. They were tricked. If you change that word to tricked, he, the enemy completely tricked them. So they didn't choose a better side of God. He made it sound like what he said was almost right, just like he did to Jesus. What he said to Jesus in his quote unquote temptations was so right. There was it, but it was really almost right. And Jesus could see that. Adam and the woman couldn't see that. They didn't realize that they were being tricked. So, and we've all been there. We've all been tricked. But if we believe, because of that belief that the woman did that, that she is lesser because she was created second, because they don't believe that when God created Adam, the human, that both male and female were inside of one person, and that God later pulled her out, and not to be under his arm and next to his rib and all that whole little poem. It's they were assigned together to cultivate the earth, to manage the earth, to be the caretakers of the earth. That was something went out to both of them. But when people believe that women are lesser, then that means we can treat them how we want. And so all of our marriage books speak to women to do better, that if they try harder, if they do better, if they have more sex, then he won't watch porn and he won't cheat on you, which is not true. That women have no right to say no, no right to say no, that only he has the right to say no. And that's not true. Um, there are so many misconceptions that only she submits. But what if Ephesians 5, which was an analogy that Paul used? What if that, if you take that as the church, and yes, he kind of went into the husbands and wives, but it started breaking down. And so if Paul knew he would have been in the New Testament, he would have been a lot more clearer. Let's just put that out there. But what if it's like we're both, because I need respect as much as my husband does. I was in an abusive marriage where my husband didn't respect me and didn't love me, but I was expected to respect and love him. This has to be mutual love, mutual respect, mutual honoring. It has to be mutual, because if it's not, the dynamic is off. But we've been taught this for so long, that men should be the leaders of the home because it says head. And it's a misconception. I won't go into all the Hebrew. There are resources that have already done all the work on that word, that it can change the dynamic of Christianity. Because in the Muslim world, now we have women being put in all black. I keep forgetting what they're called, but that there we're covering him. In Christianity, we do the same thing, only we call it modesty. And putting on women to not make sure that women, that men don't lust, because we need to not be wearing leggings or whatever you say, that we're tempting men. And that's that belief that all men lust, and they don't. I asked my husband, "Do you lust?" And he looked at me like, "What? No." Does he admire a beautiful woman? Yes, just like I admire a good-looking man. That's not lust. And so I can't be responsible for that. And that's what a lot of Christianity does. Every man's battle. I've never read the book. Obviously, it's the worst book, because it says all men lust, and it's our job as women to make sure they don't.
Well, I like the fact that you referenced Galatians 3, where since Jesus came, there is
Mm-hmm.
no nor female, there's no Jew or Greek. He does away with racial lines as well. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really important for us to recognize he has called men and women to
Mm.
righteousness. The cross changed
Yes.
everything.
Everything.
Before the
Everything.
cross, there could only be righteousness within the priest. But
Mm-hmm.
in the New Testament, we are all kings and priests. And so
Yes.
our men can be righteous. We can expect
Yes.
men to actually steward their sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't need a woman to do it. And so
Right.
again, I love the fact that there's more conversation being had, because it raises the standard, which
Mm-hmm.
Jesus actually did. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
the higher standard, because the Spirit of God lives within us, and so
Mm-hmm.
so much more available to us. Therefore, we should expect
Yeah.
righteousness in Christian relationships. We should
Yes.
expect men to walk in the light of truth, and women
Mm-hmm.
right alongside them. It stands to reason in the secular world, we see women, and in churches today, we're seeing more and more women that are lead pastors and that type of thing. But in the secular world, for years, we've seen women that are CEOs, and we see
Mm-hmm.
male and female having their skills and their talents come to the forefront. It has nothing to do with their gender. It's just
Mm-hmm.
have skilled in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really important that we in the church keep
Mm-hmm.
up. We're a little bit behind, but
Yes.
that we maintain that standard. And if we look at it through the lens of Scripture,
Mm-hmm.
can be expedited. We can catch up. We can be men and women serving in the kingdom of God. Men, not women dominating men. No,
Yeah.
no males dominating females. But that equality that a
Mm-hmm.
wise God
Yes.
expected to come with the redemption of Jesus. So it may have been that for centuries women were put under because of the curse of sin.
Mm.
God's plan. Even though we've seen it, it's not his plan. And he's
Yeah.
doing his part to redeem that. And we want to partner in that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And because it's interesting that so much for men that write these books, and then there's some of the marriage sex books written by Christian men that are giving that same message. And yet we're saying men be men, but yet we're saying, oh, but they're so weak because they can't control their control lust. And that's an attitude of what's in the heart. And it's not our job to make sure that they don't. And so, yes, Christianity's behind, which doesn't make sense to me, because we should be the forefront. The last place that domestic abuse should be is in the church. Equality between men and women should be in the church. We should not be following like other religions or cultures. We're breaking that cultural norm. Um, and my brother, years ago, so many years ago, like 2006 ish, went to India, and he went with somebody else, and they were teaching the pastors in India. And so my brother was teaching about the role, men and women, of that dynamic in the marriage. And one of the pastors says, but this isn't our culture. And my brother said, but it is the word of God. And this stopped him, that changing that culture all of a sudden, this pastor from India's mind was completely flipped that culture may say this, but the word of God says, no, we do not treat men and women. It's not the hierarchy.
That's
And so I've always wondered, did that change his mind? Did it make a shift in the church in India? I do not know, but that was such a, a transformative belief for this man that what God is teaching us, his character, is so different than what our culture is.
Well, and Karen, oftentimes where do we get our belief system? Oftentimes it is from culture, it's from what we've seen in our own families, and there has to be a real effort to unlearn
Hmm.
the things that we have just heard. They become
Yes.
cliche. So I that leads me into a couple of questions
Hmm.
that I'd like you to address. These points are really out there, and I would say you and I have had numerous conversations about this,
Hmm.
but I would say that there's a lot of thought pattern out there that we need to reframe, and I'd like you to address some of these things. For example, where abuse is concerned, people often think that there's a prototype or there's a certain type of female
Hmm.
that finds herself in a domestic abuse
Hmm.
situation.
Hmm.
She might be introverted. She might be soft natured. Those types of things. Would you speak to that? That's not the case.
Hmm.
But I want you to just speak to that, how that is a misnomer where people think it is a soft natured female that doesn't have her own direction in life that could get caught
Hmm.
in a domestic abuse situation.
Yeah. And yes, because basically they see it as, well, women are just weak. They're weak women, so they ended up in that situation. I've had several people say, I'm really strong. That would have never happened to me. And I'm like, we said that too. I wasn't a weak woman. Yes, did I have childhood trauma? But I've also known women who grew up in very healthy households that ended up in domestic abuse, because it's less about her and more about the abuser. And I use that word, I don't use narcissistic or any of that, because we cannot diagnose people. We're talking, so abuser kind of goes across any type of personality disorder or whatever. Abusers have a type of what they're attracted to. And sometimes they want a woman who has experienced trauma in their childhood, because that means she survived and she's still alive and she knows how to overcome. She knows how to endure through hard times. They like a strong woman because there's no challenge in breaking someone who's already broken. They want someone that they can have the challenge of breaking. And for a long time, I thought I was just meek and mild. And I use that word meek. I should say weak and mild is more to the belief. But I wasn't. I actually was very outspoken. I fought back. And over the years, he conditioned me not to fight back. The consequences, and they were rarely physical consequences, but whatever those consequences were, I would stop doing certain behaviors that he didn't like over the years. And that was a revelation for me, because I thought I never fought back. And then the Lord started bringing memories like, oh, wait, oh, I did fight back. I didn't just lay down and roll over. I was fighting back, but I learned that it was dangerous to do that. Again, not always physical, to reinforce that. And so I also know women who are super outspoken. They're loud, they're boisterous, they have an opinion, and they're in an abusive relationship. And then they had people at church saying, well, you need to be more meek and mild, and you need to use a softer voice, which actually, when I do that, my husband just freaks out. Because they take First Peter 3, that we should just be very like the Duggars. If you listen to a lot of the women in they're really conservative, they use that soft, sweet voice. That is not what First Peter 3 means. Has nothing to do nothing to do with that. And so But this one friend that I've just become connected with since this summer, she is just out there. And yet she was in an abusive marriage. Nothing physical, but he was literally all the control, the coercive control, all the things that were going on. And it took her a while to see it and get out. And it wasn't because she wasn't smart or intelligent or weak. It had nothing to do with that. You get into a dynamic that abusers don't like to carry their own pain. And so they dump it on you. And we don't even realize that we're taking on. It causes this cognitive dissonance where we literally begin, they keep telling us, you're this, you're that, you're nothing. Without me, you are nothing. And you begin to believe that. And so you assume it must be me. I must be the problem. It's what our brain does to us. Every woman who experiences domestic abuse gets into that mindset. And it takes a while to get out of that mindset. And it's our brain's way of protecting us. And so some abusers, go ahead.
Could I say this? I just thought of a couple of examples, and you may have some too, where you know of women that they actually carried the weight of the marriage as far as being the financial
Mm-hmm.
providers, you know,
Mm-hmm.
leaders in their community, as far as
Mm-hmm.
paid well, and maybe this abusive husband is at home. I'm
Yeah.
thinking too right now, women that
Mm-hmm.
I've met through Live at Laugh, that they actually were the breadwinners,
Mm-hmm.
cared for the children, while their abusive husbands uh,
Mm-hmm.
actually, just
Yeah.
the emotional abuse. So can you tie that together? You mentioned that you weren't always physically abused. So I think we need to recognize a deeper level of abuse and what that
Yes.
looks like.
Yes. The gal I was just talking about, she is a city councilwoman in a huge city in Utah, like one of the big cities. Um, she always she always had to work. She was the breadwinner of the home. In my case, my ex was the breadwinner, but he never wanted me to stay home with the kids. He always wanted me to work at least part-time. He kept us in financial debt constantly. So it was hard to leave a marriage when there was all this debt. And then, so the dynamics, again, what is it the abuser is looking for? He wants a woman that makes him look good. Because if everybody likes her, they're going to assume he's likable also. So really it's what is the abuser looking for in a woman? That's what he'll go for. If he wants a sugar mama, he's going to look for a professional woman and understand, because here's the next big question. Well, why didn't you see the red flags? Well, I got to tell you, in 1974, we didn't know anything about red flags. No one talked about that. The biggest thing in the Christian circles are you equally yoked? That's all that mattered. Is are you equally yoked? And it's like, and the thing is, it looks like that before while you're dating, because abusers are master deceivers. They fool everyone. When a woman finally speaks out, they go, "Oh, but he's so nice. Oh, he's such a godly man." And they look at her like she has four eyes because they can't reconcile who they think they know with what she's saying. So abusers are master deceivers. They fool everybody, even therapists. Everybody can be fooled. I have been fooled. I have trained and studied about domestic abuse, and I have been fooled by an abuser because it happens even to professionals. And I don't have letters after my name. So I'm not a therapist. But everybody does get fooled by them because they are so good at what they do. They're so good at covering up. They do not let their mask off. They don't reveal who they truly are until they have you, which in some cases is when they move in with you, or they sleep with you, or the marriage. So I've heard so many stories where the woman, they got married and the beautiful wedding and all the stuff. And the minute the hotel room door closed, all of a sudden they got called all these horrible names and it all changed. For some, that change happens slowly a little bit over time, but they don't reveal who they are until they know they have you hooked. And even then, if you're in the dating pre-marriage or pre-moving in, if they let out the dark side, so to speak, it's not demonic, it's a choice. If they let out their dark side, they will cover it up because they don't want you to see it.
Karen, are there things that you would say to a woman? You probably have
Mhm.
these opportunities in your small group, but they've come from domestic abuse,
Mhm.
family of origin, maybe had some relationships that
Mhm.
that same pattern.
Mhm.
Things that you would say to her if
Mhm.
she's saying, I don't know how to attract
Mhm.
a good man. I don't know what a good man looks like.
Yeah.
Can you give me parameters?
Yeah. There are parameters. I wish we could do it like the Treasury Department does. They learn how to find a counterfeit by studying the real $100 bills and $20 bills. They learn those bills so well so that when they see one, a counterfeit, they can recognize it. The challenge is how do we find like the good men to see the real thing? Because my husband one time, like last year, he came out of his office and he goes, I realize what I did while we were dating is what an abuser does. And I said, actually, abusers mimic what you did. Abusers mimic being honorable men and godly men. And usually one of the first clues is part of when Tom and I were dating, and he was a young Christian and he wanted to do it right. And so we talked about how to keep our relationship pure and to, we wanted to just be really careful. And I'm like, Lord, I don't know what to do about this. And he goes, give it to Tom, put it on him. And I'm like, okay, so here's what I used to do this. And he goes, no, you set the parameters and I will honor them. That is the first woman when an abuser, when you're dating, they want to learn your secrets. Tom and I went deep from the very first date because that's the way I am. I'm terrible at small talk. We went deep. That is usually not smart. And so it was a real big risk because he shared something very traumatic he went through. And so I told him about being in an abusive marriage. And abusers do that because, again, they mimic what would be normal. I never suggest that for the first date. Just because someone asks you a question doesn't mean you have to answer. Or if they share something deep, you don't have to reciprocate. So, but they want to learn your secrets, your boundaries, and your non-negotiables. And so then what they do is your boundary is that you don't want to have sex before marriage, or maybe you don't want to kiss right away. Just because you want to get to know this person, you don't know them, they will begin pushing that. Whatever you tell them, they will push that gently. And if you react going, no, I'm not ready yet, they will then step back and they will come off as safe. And then they will come back later and push and push and push and push. And I've known women who said, I didn't want to kiss right away. And he kept pushing, but you're so attractive. I'm so attracted to you. It's so hard for me to resist to not want to kiss you. And then you end up sleeping with him, and then they make it you think it was your idea. When they start pushing your boundaries, that is one of the biggest red flags. But they make it wrap it in desire and how much they like you, and there's nobody else like. I've never met a woman like you. Like, seriously, do they read all the same handbook? um Seriously. So they're really good at that, and they're really careful about pushing those boundaries, but in the end they will push them. Your non-negotiables. I had forgotten. I said while we were dating, I would never let a man hit me. I will not put up with that. So he didn't. He didn't do that. The first time he attacked me physically was several years, and he didn't use his fist. He kicked me. And I could never put those two things together ever. And all my secrets that I told him, I share with him a secret I never told anybody. And he used that against me our entire marriage. And when he learned other secrets that I had, he always flipped them out. Private things between husband and wife, he would use those. And I just learned a new word today, and it's called dog whistle. And I haven't read everything on it, but with the dog whistle, only dogs can hear that, right? Nobody else hears it. So in an abuse dynamic, when you're in public, the abuser knows certain things to say that only impact her and that nobody recognizes is a problem. And she's the only one that reacts to it. And that just set me back on my heels. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
So often.
Karen, this is making me think along the lines of the fact that men are not the only abusers. When we're
Hmm.
talking about domestic abuse, females
Hmm.
can do these very same things.
Yes.
There's that manipulation, there's that emotional collateral that you have with them, and they're twisting things, using
Hmm.
things. So that's not just a male thing. And so,
Yes.
can you speak to that as well? The fact that domestic abuse, when we're talking about a domestic abuse awareness month, it's beyond males to females.
Yes.
More common where males
Yes.
abuse
Hmm.
females, but it's not only uh,
No.
that way.
Yes, and that is true. Men, that it doesn't happen as often, because part of we have to break down first domestic abuse into two kind of categories. The batterer, the guy, we always see it on the TV and the movies where he beats her up and leaves bruises. She has black eyes. She has to wear sunglasses, putting on the makeup. Most men aren't batterers. Most men are coercive controllers, and that's when they use the threat of force to control and manipulate you. it if they hit you or do something physical, they may only do it once, because after that all they have to do is look at you. They control you every other way, through finances, through the threat of violence. They may throw something towards you but never, not with a determination to hit you. Yet they may grab your arm. There are so many ways. Coercive control, and that doesn't always happen. Women aren't There are very few women that do that whole coercive control, but I just read of one recently where she was totally. There are women that are batterers and women that are coercive controllers. It's just not as often. It's usually more men, but it is not unusual. But we also see it in the dynamic of gay relationships. um, there's a dynamic, male and female. We see these same dynamics playing out in gay relationships. And a friend of mine from high school, she asked me to talk to her cousin who was in the military, married to a guy who was in addiction, and this guy is in the army, and his partner said, you leave me, I will ruin your career. And so we chatted a bit. And so he was terrified to leave, but this man is a soldier. So the dynamics, there is not a culture on this earth, there's not a religion on this earth that is not impacted by domestic abuse. And so we have to look at it in the way of men and women. I just don't work with men because that is a whole different dynamic, but it impacts everything. It's and that's why I say the last place it should be is in Christianity. And yet so many women In Christianity, if she chooses divorce, she's the one that's shunned and they embrace the abuser.
Yes, yes. Karen, as we begin to wrap things up a bit, I think one of the things that I want to always be aware of in Alive at Last is that we don't just bring things to the forefront, but we also think about ways to take action.
Mhm.
So Alive at Last takes action in the fact that we're actually going into shelters and we're engaging
Mhm.
in relationship, bringing to light these issues and providing healing through
Mhm.
curriculums as Mending the Soul, the Explore version of that. And are there things that you would say to us? Typically, most of our Alive at Last volunteers are involved in a local church. So this is
Mhm.
far reaching.
Mhm.
On this session today, women that will listen, that churches, we probably have 14 churches that are represented. And that's a small estimation
Yeah.
of
Mhm.
churches represented at Alive at Last. And then the ways that we're impacting our community as well. So can you give us ideas, thoughts? What are your thoughts about how we can take action as Christians, how we can actually have educated conversations about domestic abuse, about abuse in general?
Mhm. Oh, that is such a good question. We First of all, being in an abusive marriage, it is so hard. The shame that we carry, which isn't ours, it's theirs, but we are carrying that shame. We don't want to admit to anybody that we're in an abusive marriage. And often the woman thinks that she's not in an abusive marriage. She thinks she's just in a hard marriage because he never hits her, has never been physically violent at all. And so she thinks she's just in a hard or a difficult marriage. What she doesn't know is she's in a coercive control marriage. And so she may not have put words for that. And if you see it and you broach it, she's going to shut you down. Ask me how I know. Um, so the best thing we can do is to make ourselves available, to be a safe person, to if someone even to be open that if someone does talk to us, that we don't give her answers, we don't take away all the band-aids of everything we say as Christianese, get rid of all of those and just embrace her and believe her. Because women, the courage that it takes for them to actually say it out loud is so big. And we don't want to throw band-aids on it. We just want to embrace them. We single mamas in church, most of them have come out of domestic abuse. And often there is no help from them. Nobody sets up a meal train. Nobody provides diapers or clothes or support for a woman like we would if her husband died. We don't do that with our single mamas. We don't help them in the holidays. They need help. Every birthday, every anniversary is a traumatic event for her. And just starting with those single moms that are divorced and to give them a place where they can feel safe and get the resources they need. And we don't do that. And I classify them where it says to take care of the orphans and the widows. These women are widows. They've been abandoned. Their husbands who vowed to love them instead abandoned them emotionally and psychologically. Even though they stayed in the same house, they abandoned them and treated them as no man should ever treat a woman, ever.
I love that. I love the fact that what I heard you say, that there's safety in community. If
Mm-hmm.
there's such reason for us to
Mm-hmm.
engage and get to know the woman sitting down the pew from
Mm-hmm.
us at church,
Yes.
because
Yes.
we know statistically this is happening. And where do women come for help in our community? Oftentimes they
Mm-hmm.
will come to the church hoping someone will see
Yes.
them,
Mm-hmm.
someone will understand. And so
Yeah.
as we discuss these things, there's an empowerment that can come where
Yeah.
we are beginning to notice there's a single mom. I need to
Mm-hmm.
lock
Mm-hmm.
arms with her. And so
Yes.
I love those points. Karen, also, you have a wealth of resources. I know Call to Peace is one of these great resources out there. So, can you mention maybe there's some other organizations that you know that are specifically focused on domestic abuse, and just knowing those resources can be helpful to
Mm.
us when that woman does trust us and does say, "Look, I don't know where to go. I'm stuck in
Mhm.
a situation." Do you have some of those that you might could share with us?
I actually have a whole list of resources on my website, at anotheroneFree.com/resources. There's a tab. I list podcasts, I list books, I list all of the resources because often they first want to find what are the books that I can read, or podcasts is even safer to listen to because if she's in the abusive marriage, a book is a tough one for her to have. And so having the resources of different podcasts that I've been on, and podcasts that I've listened to. So those resources are all there. And it's just so important that we are there. And I do like one thing that you said, that we get to know the people because here, look, we have all the statistics, but do you realize statistics are only based on reported cases? And most women in domestic abuse in the church do not report. So the numbers could be as awful as 1 in 2 women. I will
Yes.
tell you, in the Black community and in Native American community, it is 1 in 2, and those are unreported cases. In the white community, 1 in 3, but how much of that is not reported?
I love the
And
fact that you bring that up, Karen. It is true that those
mhm,
are the statistics are based on reports. And so how many are going unseen,
mhm,
unreported? And
mhm,
so that really does up the number. And with
yes,
sexual abuse just across the board, the numbers are
mhm,
1 in 4 women.
yes,
So with domestic abuse, the fact that you mentioned it could be one out of every two, and
right,
so just understanding that and recognizing the relevance, the urgency, and
mhm,
that we have so much to offer as women when
mhm,
and we come in relationship. And I love that fact because that attests to what God has called us to do at
mhm,
a light at last, and you at another one free,
mhm,
where we're called to be in relationship. It goes back to the biblical value
mhm,
of the fact that we are supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves.
yes,
Well, we've
mm,
got to get to know them. We've got
yes,
to go
yes,
into the shelters. We've
mhm,
got to break down barriers. We've got to get to know women in our church that we share community with.
mhm,
In that, the Lord will open opportunities. He just
mhm,
anytime we learn something, we are made aware of the reality of a situation. God has someone that is armed and ready,
mhm,
has an
mhm,
awareness, and that's a wonderful tool for him to use in his kingdom in order to lock arms with women
yeah.
and make change happen.
Yeah.
I,
One last thing I would like to say, when you were speaking at the event that you had last spring, and you said it takes a woman 7 or 8 times to leave human trafficking, and it shocked me because that's the same number, how many times it takes a woman to leave in domestic abuse. I also want people to understand that abusers use the same dynamics as traffickers to trap a woman. They use the same dynamics. So that's why these two are so close together, because the end result for both types of women, because yes, you can be raped in an abusive marriage. Um, it's hard to separate those two.
yes. Karen, in when we get so far this year, we've served 92 women
Mm-hmm.
in our ministry. And out of that 92, there might be three that don't list domestic abuse. It happened in
Yeah.
their family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
But like you say, these things they're interweaved.
Mm-hmm.
So the dysfunction that takes
Yeah.
place in families, it's one of those things that we want to be made aware of. We want to ask the Lord what our response should be. I want to
Mm-hmm.
thank you first of all for
Oh,
writing your book, for the response that you're giving through your
Mhm.
own. Again, I want you to be aware of what's in the chat. Her Karen's link to her website so that you can find further resources. Those are available to us. And so I just thank you, Karen, for the stand that you're taking. And for we're just so blessed to have
Yeah.
an expert like you in our own Alive Alive circles.
Mhm.
And so we're just grateful for you. Thank you for your time today. Do you
Mhm.
have any closing remarks before we close?
I taking the stigma off of domestic abuse. When we take that off, when we don't look at women as they're weak or there's a flaw in them or something wrong with them, that healing is possible, but that those of us that are not in it, that we can become safe people, that we are so safe that a woman can open up to us to share her deepest, darkest secret, her deepest, darkest shame. That is what is so important, that we can become that for women. And I love what you said. It's all about relationship. Abuse happens in relationship. Healing comes through relationship. It's why the small groups are so important. As you find out, I went on a retreat this summer and all these women felt so isolated. And what they found out that day is they were not alone. Other women were feeling exactly the same way that they were. And it gave them a flicker of hope.
Yes. Well, I love the point that you mentioned. We can all be a safe place.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just thank you all for attending today. Thank you, Karen. I just ask that as you embark on your weekend, that you
Hmm.
spend time just maybe having a conversation with the Lord about, Lord, what can I do next? Is there someone in my church? Is there someone in my circle that is experiencing domestic abuse? And would you please open my eyes and show me what my action point can be? Thank you all for joining us today. Again, you've got the links that Karen and I discussed in our discussion today, and we hope to see you next month at our training in November. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.